Time? Oh, it's 4 o'clock.
I call to order this meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. Today is Tuesday, October 4th. The time is 4 p.m. I would request let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Vice President Dr. Hartwells, can you lead us, please?
Yes. Pledge
Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. And I request a roll call vote right now from my far right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Libby Hartwells.
And I'm Julie Sinowski. We do have a quorum. And at this time, I am going to ask for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion to approve the agenda has passed 3-0. And I will request a motion to move into executive session at this time.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor to move into executive session at this time, please say aye.
Aye.
I move to convene into executive session regarding an appeal of a recommendation for the expulsion of student 228197 pursuant to ARS 15-843.A regarding the appeal of an expulsion to ARS 38-431.03.A.2 for discussion or consideration of records exempt by law from public inspection. At this time, we will reconvene our special meeting. It is Tuesday, October 4th, and it is 6 p.m. And we will move on to our superintendent's comments at this time.
Well, good evening, President Snowski, Vice President Hartwells, and members of the governing board. Appreciate the opportunity to update the board on just a couple of things of importance. First, as you know, on Saturday, we had an active shooter drill, and I want to thank our Director of Security, Josh Friedman, and all the people who were involved in that event. Our partnership with Scottsdale Police Department, Scottsdale Fire, Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, and others who participated made the event very useful for all of us as we think about planning for what we hope will never happen here. In particular, I wanted to point out one of the things that we learned that is a direct result of action taken by the governing board earlier this year is that the access to cameras by the Real Crime Center at Scottsdale Police Department changed the nature of the planned scenario. So the scenario included 3 active shooters on campus, and the volunteers from Scottsdale Unified were placed in different classrooms, and there was an expectation of certain scenarios playing out, including a hostage scenario, some fatalities. And what we learned as a result of access to the real-time video feed is that the police officers who were called in, and they did not know what the scenarios were. They knew that they would be called to some school as a part of the drill, but they didn't know anything else. Because of access to the cameras, they were able to neutralize 2 of the 3 active shooters within 5 minutes of the 911 call being placed, and then the 3rd within 10 minutes. And there were members of the volunteer actors who survived the event that were not expected to survive in the scenario because the officers were able to respond very directly by identifying and neutralizing the threat quickly. It was something that I think surprised in a positive way everyone in the room, because we had hoped that access to the cameras would allow police to be strategic in that way. We just did not know how much of an impact that would have. From a district perspective, we were able to learn a lot about our communication protocols, how our incident command team will set up if we have an incident like this or some other emergency. Building the relationship with our team was really important. We have an after-action review planned after fall break. And we got an email from the police department talking about how grateful they are for the trust and cooperation from the Scottsdale Unified School District to be able to utilize the campus cameras in the event of an emergency. So I just want to thank everyone who participated. Again, this is not something that we ever hope happens on our campuses, but we do believe that the partnership across agencies is better equipped to respond should something happen. To build on that, October, in a very important way, October is National Bullying Prevention Month. And one of the things that we know is going to be really important in preventing the potential for an active shooter on our campus is to address incidents and issues of bullying, kinds of things that cause some people to act out of desperation and harm other individuals. And so this month we'll be spending a lot of time talking about how do we nurture a safe and supportive learning environment for all students? How do we confront acts of bullying to ensure that no student has to fear for their own safety and well-being when they come to our schools? So we'll build on that theme and continue to focus on how we provide the support and climate on all 29 of our campuses that our students need and deserve. Thirdly, we are still celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month. That started September 15th and goes through October 15th. We have a number of different ways that this is being recognized across our campuses, and we'll be working with our curriculum team to codify that online so that we can continue to provide ideas for our teachers at all levels of our school system. We are fast approaching fall break. First quarter of this school year is nearly in the books. It's still hard for me to believe that how fast time flies. We look forward to being able to put a bow on the first quarter, and then to our staff and students and families being able to take a little bit of break before we begin the rest of this calendar year. And the final piece of encouraging news that I wanted to share with the governing board tonight is, as we looked at the 40th day average daily membership count, the numbers that we have reflect 84 more students, ADM, than we had budgeted for. So that's a positive variance of 84 on the ADM front as of the 40th day. We do hope that will continue as we head into the 100th day count and throughout the rest of the school year, but it's a positive bit of news to share. And with that, I'll conclude my comments.
Thank you, Superintendent Menzel. At this point, we will move on to our information and discussion items. And first up is the assessment and accountability update from Dr. Bachna and Dr. Benson.
It's magic. Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, board members, Dr. Menzel, and all here this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to make a very quick connection between our strategic plan goal A, academic excellence, and the assessment and accountability update you'll hear this evening. Also wanted to take the opportunity to thank the members of our accountability and assessment team that put together our presentation, and members of our Ed Services and Teaching and Learning team for being here this evening to respond to questions that you might have as well. As we've had conversations to establish key performance indicators and specific targets for those we've identified as priority KPIs in recent months, we've been purposeful to share that increasing student learning at every grade level and content area is a priority for us, and that our site continuous improvement plans include goals that impact all students. We've also been purposeful to share that we'd continue to report district, state, and national results at all grade levels and content areas and compare our learning data to peer districts, which is a main part of the agenda this evening. While we've got important work to do, we have real reasons to celebrate in our student learning data as well. So I wanted to take a minute to thank our Dr. Cindy Bachna, Director of Assessment and Accountability and CIMAR, and our data analyst, Dr. Anna Simpson, for putting together the comprehensive review, and welcome our Cindy to the podium. Cindy? Thank you.
Perfect. Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Benson. I'm happy to be here tonight to present an overview of our local, state, and national student achievement across a variety of measures. So with that, let's start with our state assessment data. We are going to be using a number of acronyms tonight, so I'm going to begin with the definitions. First, our grade 3 through 8 test in math and English is now called Arizona's Academic Standards Assessment, or AASA. Next, we have Arizona's Science Test, which we will be referring to as AZ-Sci. The ACT Aspire is the 9th grade pre-ACT assessment, and ACT stands for the American College Test that our 11th graders all take each year. This chart shows the shift in our state general education testing over time. The focus continues to be on English language arts, math, and science across the majority of grade levels. There has been a reduction in the amount of state testing required in high school to be a focus now on 9th and 11th grades. This school year will be the second administration of the AASA in grades 3 through 8, the ACT Aspire in grade 9, and the ACT in grade 11, and AZ-Sci in grades 5, 8, and 11. This is just a different level of detail for reference on which grade levels take which tests. Of note, our 11th graders take 2 science tests. They take the science component of the ACT as well as the state assessment AZ-Sci. So moving on, let's consider our AASA scores both for spring 2022 as well as a comparison to prior year results. While the test names have changed over time, the content of the assessments in grades 3 through 8 has stayed consistent, which does allow for us to compare backward to prior year testing. On the screen is a comparison of AASA and ACT scores from spring 2022 in Scottsdale to those in 9 other school districts. These school districts were chosen because of their demographic composition, as well as their location in the East and North Valley. In terms of our ELA scores among our peers, SUSD ranked first in all but 6th and 7th grade ELA in terms of percent testing as proficient or passing last spring. In 6th and 7th grade, in those levels, we ranked 3rd. Now, looking ahead to our AAS and math comparison for our districts, you can see that we continue to rank first among our peers in 4 of the 7 grade levels. Our 6th grade math ranked 6th amongst the districts, and our 7th and 11th graders were ranked 3rd. Looking at our overall AASA scores from this past year, this is combining all grade levels together. What you see now on the screen is a comparison of our results not only to the state but to our county. And you can see in both areas, both in English language arts and in math, we outperformed the state and the county by a significant margin. We were 18 percentage points higher than Maricopa County results in English language arts and 22% of percentage points higher than Maricopa County in math results. Looking now at our AASA English language arts results broken out by grade level, you can see that we were strong throughout elementary school. We saw a dip in 6th grade where the change was also seen in the state as well. We were higher than the state and the county across all grade levels, but we do see that dip between 5th and 6th grades. In 7th grade, we became higher again with a 59% passing rate, and in 8th grade English language arts, we saw 55%. Looking at math, again, we continue to be very strong in the elementary grade levels. Looking at our middle school scores, our scores did dip in 6th and 7th grades. And finally, our 8th grade math scores did show an increase and were, again, the highest among our comparison districts. Again, we still continue to be significantly higher than the state and county averages. Looking at the state assessment scores over time, what you see now is 4 years worth of data with that gap year of 2020 when we did not test for during the pandemic. We are not quite back to where we were in 2018 when we had a 62% passing rate in grades 3 through 8 in math. But however, we are doing better than we were doing in spring of 2021. So this last year, our overall passing rate on the mathematics exam was 58%. Looking at English language arts, again, the same kind of comparison. You have pre-pandemic on the left-hand side of the chart and post-pandemic on the right-hand side. We are not back to where we were pre-pandemic levels. However, we did see an increase from spring 2021 to spring 2022 in terms of recovery to where we were prior to the pandemic in terms of English language arts. Now let's briefly consider our ACT Aspire results. Again, this is a test we give in grade 9, and this was the first year we had this assessment in our state. Our ACT, in terms of our ACT Aspire performance, SUSD outperformed the state in all 4 tested areas. In the national comparison, we outperformed in 3 of 4 areas and tied the national state average in science. Moving on now to our ACT results, which is our grade 11. So on this chart, we're seeing the percent of students meeting the state-defined cut scores on the ACT. Cut scores were established for English language arts and math on the ACT for state accountability purposes in order to assign school letter grades this fall. You can see here that SUSD outperforms the county and state in both areas. Looking now at our AZ-SCI. 1 minute. So I want to take a minute just to talk about the differences between AIMS and AZ-SCI. So this is where we don't really have a comparison back to what we used to have with AIMS Science for several reasons. First off, the previous test was given in grades 4, 8, and 10. And now the current test is given in grades 5, 8, and 11. AIMS Science was given on, did not test the major science domains at all grade levels and was testing on grade level. In comparison, the AZ-SCI, the new model of science testing that we have, is 3 years of science standards covered in a single test at the end of the 3rd year. So what that translates to is our 5th graders are taking, covering, their test covers the grade levels bands from 3 through 5. Our 8th graders, their test covers the grade level bands in science of 6 through 8. And 11th grade covers the grade level bands of 9th through 11th. When you look at our AZ-SCI results by grade level, we can see that 44% of our 5th and 8th graders passed the assessment, while 28% of our 11th graders passed. State and district comparisons were not published as of 4:30 this afternoon when I last checked. Of note, our current high school curriculum did not address the level and rigor of AZ-SCI, and we are currently beginning a high school curriculum adoption to look into this. Overall, our passing rate, if you took all grade levels together, was 38%. Moving on now to other district assessments and diagnostics that we have assessment data for. We're going to talk briefly about the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is the SAT, our Advanced Placement Exam results, and then our FastBridge and iReady results. So, talking about the SAT. All students in Arizona take the ACT as of last spring, like we just talked about. However, students that take the SAT elect to do so. So these are students choosing to take the SAT on their own. This isn't a district-provided exam. You can see that our number of tested students on the SAT has gone down over time, likely due to the fact that we've been giving the ACT to all of our students since the spring of 2018. So every 11th grader has been taking that test for now 4 or 5 years. Arizona numbers are higher than the national average on these exams, but SUSD numbers are also higher than both the state and the national average. So this is the SAT total score. Looking at the subcategory for evidence-based reading and writing, again, over time, you can see that our self-selecting students who test outperform the state and national averages in the evidence-based reading and writing subscore. And again, the same trend in math. But keep an eye on our number tested, like I said. They are decreasing each year as we've made ACT free and accessible to every SUSD student. Pausing now to look at our AP exams and our results. On this chart, our percentage of students earning 3 or higher on AP exams, which is generally considered a passing score, increased from spring 2021 to spring 2022, nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. The high scores in spring 2020 appear to be an anomaly for both the district and the nation. This may be due to the fact that students took the exams from home that year while schools were closed. So, something to keep in mind. Looking at, now this is kind of a different kind of comparison. This is something we considered last year. I didn't present this formally to the board last year, but we looked at what if, potentially, all of our students that had these passing scores were to take those credits to the college and be allowed college credit for their scores. And if we consider that at the cost of a single credit hour at ASU, which we've determined to be $765 from their website, in 2022, SUSD students had the potential to save $4.5 million in tuition. Now again, our students generally are enrolled full-time, they're not paying per credit hour, but still a powerful comparison to see, oh my gosh, the potential, right? Also of note on this chart is that there's 29 separate assessments listed here, reflecting the variety of AP coursework available across our campuses. So not only do we have students doing very well on these assessments, we have a number of options for them to take these AP courses. Now let's turn to some of our local assessment results. First, we're going to talk about our FastBridge. We have our suite of screen assessments, the diagnostic screeners that we use in grades K through 5. Okay, what you're seeing here is our fall 2021 and fall 22 test scores by grade level. The first set of bars present kindergarten results for fall 2021, next to kindergarten results for fall 2022 in reading. The blue and teal portions of these charts are the highest levels of performance, where students' percentile ranks are between the 40th and 99th percentiles. This chart demonstrates that our current year students are starting out at a higher level of literacy in the majority of grade levels. Looking at our FastBridge math, this chart is the same information but for math data. Again, in the majority of grade levels, our current year students demonstrated higher performance at the start of fall 2022 than a year ago. This is a good baseline for our students as we move through the school year. Looking at our iReady, on the next few slides, we'll review our iReady data from fall 2021 and fall 2022. Of note, the fall 2022 testing window for our elementary students is wrapping up this Friday. So the data presented here may shift slightly as a few classrooms are completing the testing this week. So looking at our reading assessment, on this chart you are seeing the iReady reading data across grade levels for schools that have requested ESSER funding to use these assessments and program. The national averages from the fall 2021 are in the first column of each data set. The blue and teal bars indicate students testing on, mid, or above grade level at the start of the school year. You can see that our students match or outperform the national averages. As this is the data for the start of the school year, we would not expect the majority of our students to be mid or above grade level. Ideally, we want to see the percentage of students performing below or approaching grade level to decrease as we progress through the school year. The national data for 2022 is still pending. Looking at our iReady math. In most grade levels, our current year students are starting off better than their prior year counterparts, and across all grade levels, their performance exceeds the national averages. I have two more brief updates to give on this presentation surrounding data access and state accountability, but first, the data dashboard. You've seen me present on the data dashboard during previous board meetings. On the screen, you are seeing some information that each school can quickly generate on their own at a glance using the dashboard. Dr. Simonson and myself have had some great presentations utilizing the data dashboard with our administrators, who all now know how to access the tool and dig into their data. The feedback has been really positive. One of our principals told me some of these products aren't really that useful, but this one is. I'll use it. It's very intuitive, and even people who might not feel very techy, so to speak, are finding it easy to get in and poke around to generate reports on their students. Dr. Simpson is taking the lead on learning how to customize dashboards as well that meet the needs of our schools. We still have a ways to go with this project. A student risk analysis is in the works, as well as incorporating information from our financial and human resource systems. There's also an MTSS option available that the Academic Excellence Strategic Plan Committee, Dr. Sackos is leading, is considering may be beneficial to our school district. Accountability update, just want to end with a brief accountability update. On September 26th, the State Board of Education reviewed potential cut scores for the school letter grades. These letter grades will be issued based on data from the 21-22 school year to every school in the state. The last time said letter grades were awarded was in 2019, prior to the pandemic. The cut scores will be formally approved at the October 17th board meeting, and school letter grades will be released on or by November 1st. The state student achievement data presented tonight is a good sign that Scottsdale school letter grades will be competitive. And with that, I turn it over to you for questions.
Board members, questions? Board Member Greenberg?
For the ACT data, are we able to, and potentially for the SAT data, are we able to do kind of a comparison chart to top performing districts or schools in the United States generally the way that we've done with our Arizona exams?
It's a good question. Go ahead, Anna, have you seen that?
Actually, yes, I could do that for you. I'm going to write it down, in fact. So you want for top districts nationwide?
Yeah, just to, I mean, the United States wide, the nationwide data average is helpful, but it's also nice to see what our goals, what we should be aiming to in looking at that information.
Okay, both SAT and ACT.
Yes.
Oh, that's first on my to-do.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, that's a fun project. Thank you.
Any other questions? Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Thank you, President Snowski. Thank you, Dr. Bachna, you and your team for putting together the information. On slide 18, first, thank you for numbering your slides. Slide 18, state-defined cut scores. Do you recall what the cut scores were?
I don't. I should have written them down. I meant to before I came in here. I can look them up and get back to
I
you.
tried to do a quick
I
review
know.
on their webpage, and I wasn't readily finding the cut scores.
I want to say it's like a 17 or 18 out of 36 that gets you to a passing, but I have to confirm that.
A composite.
It's by subject area, so
Oh,
one's
okay,
the ELA and
subject.
one's the math. I'll have to look up the exact numbers for you, though.
Okay,
And they have them for all 4 performance levels.
thank you. Okay. And then slide 21,
Yes.
the AZ science test.
Yes.
So we have here that the high school science curriculum adoption, so there will not be a middle school science adoption at the same time?
I might need to turn over to my colleagues in teaching and learning to talk about
I
that.
see Ms. Kaiser back there.
Yes.
Dr. Benson.
That's a yes?
And I'm happy to support too.
Dr. Ritz.
We are looking to review the middle school curriculum too and update pieces to that to make it sure it's aligned and rigorous as well. But the main focus will be on the big areas at the high school level this year. So both will be under review and plan to update both over a 2-year process.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that because the numbers would suggest, of course, that this is a pipeline review that's required here. Great, okay. And I did notice in the next presentation, there is textbook budget that was not spent during the pandemic, so there should be plenty of funds to cover a wide range curriculum adoption in science. How do you intend to use these results to inform that curriculum adoption process, or just in general? How is teaching and learning using this information to do things differently or to inform decision-making to do things differently and move the needle? I think there's a lot of granularity here that suggests that there might need to be some kind of cohorting and segmentation of the data as opposed to, oh, this will work for everybody. So how are you going about that analysis? Maybe Dr. Benson's the best person to field that.
There's a team of us that could likely respond to this question, but I'll just try to answer by sharing an example. One area that we know we need to take a look at based on our data and based on anecdotal conversations is our middle school math. Varies greatly from 6 to 8. We know we have an instructional materials question. Persons have asked about that, so we want to do a little mini program evaluation and listen to our teachers about how it's going with our curriculum materials in middle school math. Talk about what's working and what's not, hearing from our teachers, kind of explore what it is, how frequently we are using our Tier 1 instructional tool and what we're using for interventions and remediation as well. And we've got licenses for tutoring services too that could be at work. We could extend those significantly if our teachers are on board to do that for all kids not being proficient. So given ESSER allows us to target unfinished learning, that would be a good use of our dollars as well. So it's targeting areas and having comprehensive conversations about how we systematically can take a look at it. And then on the flip side of that, where we can drill down and are more granular about where things are going well, listening to the stories of where we've got maybe grade level teams that have knocked it out of the park, finding out what it is that they believe is the reason for their success of their scores and allowing space to share their stories moving forward. And an example of that, one of our elementary schools in their math scores just shared the systematic way that they've tended to instructional minutes, how they use their Tier 1 resources, how they group their students flexibly, what additional minutes they've got, that kind of thing. So systematically district-wide, taking a look at areas that warrant more attention, and then looking at outliers and what they're doing well and making sure we have space to share their stories as well. Does that help respond to the question?
I think so. Did you want to add?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, if I understood the other part of the question is how does this inform our curriculum adoption process, thinking about science, for example? And one of the questions that we've started exploring is scope and sequence. So does it matter what order we offer science courses related to when students are tested and the knowledge that's built over time? With Hanover Research, it's one of the things that we put on the table when we met with them a week or two ago to say, what research do we have about, for example, physics first versus other approaches to scope and sequence. So I think some of it is from this data. We're going to ask additional informed questions related to how to approach that in order to ensure that we're structuring it in a way that will help our students master the concepts that are expected across those domains that were identified in the tested areas.
And I see Dr. Dodds, Karen hovering. Did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thank you. To add to what Dr. Benson and Dr. Menzel have just shared as well, I want you to know that Johanna Kaiser, our science coach, has begun meeting with groups of teachers to talk about the science achievement data. In addition, on October 20th and October 27th, she has brought groups of teachers together to look at course sequencing. How do we need to realign our courses? And that can help us make decisions about the curriculum adoptions that we will pursue. After fall break, we will also provide the governing board with a memo of our plan for pursuing the curriculum adoption for science.
Thank you. And that's grades 6 through 12?
Correct.
Thank you. Good. Very good. Okay. I was aware of the scope and sequencing, at least for science, for earlier discussions that we'd had, and I appreciate that. I guess I'm not exactly sure what it means by share space for stories. What does that mean? Does that mean best practices, identify some best practices that are being used? What about the ESSER projects? There are some best practices that seem to be percolating to the top based on data there. Is that, how's that all kind of coming together?
So we need to justify with ESSER each of our purchases and show results, so that kind of reporting is happening. In fact, Alice is going to another a meeting about that tomorrow, accountability for that, justifying dollars that we're using, and results has become more of an issue with ESSER. But to respond to your question about sharing space for the stories, for example, we have over an hour on Thursday at our all admin meeting, all principals and district admin, just this week. Part of that will be Cognia accreditation, and we talk a little bit about the standards that we're looking at there, and then the continuous improvement template that they're using, allowing them to share what's working based on their data. That's an embedded conversation for all of our leaders. So on the leaders level, creating spaces like that for us to collaborate with our leaders and have them sharing out what's working and what questions and challenges they're having. But on the teaching and learning front, I'm happy to invite some of our teaching and learning team members here. We just had our second district early release where the focus was on academics, goal 1, and we broke it out differentiated by content area. And our teaching and learning team members, and I can't recall how many different learning experiences we had, but that's when we meet in targeted groups and talk through what's working, what's not, our data, best practices or evidence-based practices. And then one more piece or connection to this, in order to be accredited through Cognia, we have to establish evidence-based look-fors by second semester and talk about the universal distinguished practices that will champion across our campuses. So lots of layers of conversation that happen, so it's not a one-shot done, looking at our data, talking about what's most important that we want to model and work with our teachers to establish those too, so it's not coming top down. Teaching and learning persons, do you want to add anything?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Benson. I had a few other questions on slide 35. Slide 35. So the iReady math, and I guess that's also for the FastBridge. How many buildings are participating?
All of the buildings are participating in the middle school. I would have to get back to you on how many buildings are participating in the elementary level. Looking at the numbers, quite a few of them is my estimation, just based on the enrollment numbers.
Okay, but we're not sure. It may not be all of K through 5 or K-8.
It's not every student K-5 for math. It's every student 6 through 8 for math.
Okay,
But I will look into exactly how many schools that is.
okay, I'm just curious.
And I should also point out, the kindergarten test is a computer adaptive test given at the start of the year. You can tell in our numbers that more kindergartners took it this year than last year, but it's still kind of one of those things, do we really want to be giving the kindergartners, when they're in the first weeks of
Yeah.
being a kindergartner, a computer adaptive test? So sometimes they'll wait till the middle of the year to give the test as opposed to starting this fall.
I see. Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then on that accountability update, you did that nice timeline. So there was a presentation on September 26th of what the cut scores would be, assuming there are no changes. What does K through 8 look like for us?
We don't know by district. They presented the state as a whole. The proposed cut scores for both K-8 and for high school are the ones that are recommended identify more schools as A's and B's and less schools as C's, D's, and F's. So it's now up to the state board to decide if they want to make the cut in that direction or if they would prefer to have a more distribution of higher number of C's than versus a higher number of B's. So generally speaking, historically, the state board has taken the recommendations of their technical advisory committee, which chooses to go with having more schools identified towards the higher range of A, B, and C.
Okay, so right now, it's too preliminary to say what that might look like for Scottsdale.
As soon as they model the data in their system, which they haven't done yet, I'm hoping after October 17th, they'll have more of a crystal clear vision of where we're going to be.
Okay, great, all right, thank you.
Board Member Beckman.
Thank you for this as well. So I sound like a broken record, but this data once again proves we have an issue with middle school math, particularly as they transition from 5th grade to 6th grade. The last presentation we had, I suggested, not that I'm suggesting we go backward and move our 6th graders back to the K-5 level, I'm not suggesting that. But I would be curious to know, and I know the tests have changed, but unfortunately, we do need to look in further. Why are they having a struggle transitioning? I mean, to go from your own data from number 1 to number 6 among our peer groups should be a very large, significant red flag. And the last presentation that we had regarding supports, we were really putting a lot of emphasis on summer school and kind of really targeting those kids that were having difficulty. So I think as a district, we need to look at this and say we need to do better. We have to raise the bar as far as challenging ourselves to get more of our students in those summer school interventions. I mean, I think there was like 100, I don't remember, out of all of these kids. So we need to identify those targets and we need to kind of challenge ourselves to get better. And if technology is an issue, we've already talked about how there are so many tools out there. If our families cannot commit to dropping their kids off to a actual physical site in summer for interventions, then maybe we should look at some sort of technological aspects to help them out. So at the risk of sounding repetitive, I really would like us to do something with regard to middle school math and why this, so my own kids went through this. So again, thank you for listening to it.
Thank you, Board Member Beckman. And to add to that, these are national trends, as is evident. And this has been recently in the news talking about the reading issues, early learning experiences, phonics, mathematics, transitioning from elementary to middle school, the lack of basic math facts learning, which stumps kids up when they're trying to do advanced math. So yes, this is something for our district to be concerned about. I mentioned before the important role that parents also play. You mentioned about getting kids to take advantage of these opportunities. It's not just summer school and waiting till then. We are offering tutoring services. And I know we have very committed staff members who open their doors before school, during lunch, and after school. So the trick becomes the ownership of kids recognizing their need for additional support and taking advantage of the supports offered. Kind of end on that one. But thank you, by the way, for defining the alphabet soup of assessments at the beginning. I really appreciate that because there are people who do pay attention to these presentations and they don't know what the acronyms stand for either. So thank you for defining those to begin with. And as far as definition is concerned, can you please make a statement to the general public defining which students take these standardized tests in our district? Is it just select students?
It's every student. The state assessment, we're required by law to test 95% of our students in each grade levels, grade 3 through 8 and 11, and ninth too.
Thank you for
And we do.
making that statement, because, you know, when we're looking at, let's just pull slide 11 back here, the ELA grades 3 through 8% passing. When you look at that, let's just say the 8th graders, SUSD is at 55% passing, Maricopa County 38, National 30, or Arizona 36. Can you also clarify what happens to those other 45% of Arizona students? Are they actually just failing, like blank paper, not answering tests? Can you kind of go a little deeper on that, please?
In terms of the English language arts scores in particular, they have to complete a reading test and a writing test, and the writing test does influence the scores. It's usually, they are attempting to answer the items. If they're completely blank, they're not scored at all. They're not showing up in this data. So they have to have attempted to answer the questions. In math, it's the same thing. They have to attempt to answer the questions. And there's 2 sessions of these tests. Actually, with English, there's 3. So you have to show up for all the sessions and take questions in each of those sessions in order to receive a result. Do these test scores prevent students from being moved to the next grade? Not unless we're looking at 3rd grade. With Move On and Reading, it has a potential for students to be retained. Generally speaking, we haven't had to retain students in SUSD because we do have our summer school programs.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think generally out in our community, people will look at these numbers and they'll say only 55% of the students in Scottsdale schools in grades 3 through 8 are passing ELA. That paints a very dark picture, and I think it doesn't tell the whole story of where a student starts and their progress that they make. Now, granted, I don't think anyone sitting at these tables would like to see us to be at the county average or state average. Even though we may be ahead of those, and I don't know any teacher that is satisfied with such scores. But I think it needs to be said that teachers are assessing kids, not just through these standardized tests, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but they're doing it on a regular basis through their direct instruction, through their checking for understanding. And so kids are given the instruction to help them on a daily basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So teachers do assess kids on a regular basis. These are results on standardized test scores, and none of us here say this is fantastic. It does point out the work that we have to do, and I really like the idea that was brought up by Dr. Benson and her team, of looking at where the successes are and what strategies are being utilized. Whether it means a teacher is requiring a particular amount of work outside of the classroom, how they're implementing small group instruction, all that good stuff. So this is this was information and discussion item and an update. So we will look forward to additional updates, and thank you to your entire team back there who work with our teachers to help our students on a regular basis. Zach, question?
Do we know when parents will get the AZSI results for their students?
I believe they were sent to the schools, but I'll double check that if you haven't received them yet. Okay, let me cycle back with my testing coordinator. My instinct is that because they went from 5th grade to 6th grade, for instance, it has to switch schools. It goes back to the 5th grade where they took the test. So I'll follow up on that.
And then is there an assessment, a science assessment to progress monitor learning?
That we give as a district standardized?
Or that we could give to progress monitor?
I am not aware. I don't know if my colleagues back there have anything that they... She's nodding her head.
So for high school, we have the Horizon. It's pre-ACT tests and we give it in 9th grade, 10th grade, and practice ACT, not pre-ACT, practice ACT tests. And it does all reading, math, and science. So we do have benchmark data for 9th, 10th, and 11th graders in high school. Last year was the first year that we did those. And typically you can give 3 per year. They weren't available until a little later in the year, but right now that window is open and it closes on Friday. So we expect to see some good data for high school. For elementary, our curriculum has really great assessments that are in there that the teachers use, and we do have a way to look at it kind of across schools, and we don't currently have something for middle school.
Okay.
Vice President Dr. Wells.
Thank you, President Snowski. I wanted to follow up on the point that Board Member Beckman was making and connect it to the point I was making, which is of course, the middle school cliff is in this data. Again, that's my term, it's not a pedagogical term. But I do think also what's in this data and in some of the ESSER data is suggestions that some of the interventions that we're using are better for some grades and not others, including middle school. And that maybe we need to rethink or come up with some additional interventions or come at this from a different angle of how to better support the 4th grade through 7th grade age range for math and science. And every time we see this data, it's there. So I hope that with the ESSER projects that are going to be considered for this calendar year, that we'll start to see something maybe a little bit different perspective on how to approach interventions at those grade levels, as opposed to kind of what is working in certain grade levels doesn't appear to be quite as effective in others. Thank you.
Ms. Kaiser mentioned windows being opened, and I mentioned this before, I don't recall to who, but it was brought to my attention that the standardized-based grade book, the window is quite short, and what it does is it puts the weight on teachers to have to work over their breaks, sometimes to assess to input the information, because it's very specific. It's not just letter grade. It's results on particular standards. I'm going to make a very formal request right now that we keep that window open so teachers can assess and input student progress as they're moving through their instruction with students.
So teachers do have the ability to input progress throughout the semester. The final point right now for those 2 weeks is just to post the final grade. It's just that historically our elementary schools have chosen not to use our grade book in that fashion throughout the semester, but that's absolutely a conversation we can have as far as how that grade book is utilized.
That would be perfect, because that was not how it was presented to me. It was the grade book window is open, and they have a certain amount of time to input the information, and the request was to keep it open
longer
throughout the year.
Got it.
So
Yes.
a teacher may not be working on a particular standard they're assessing at a certain time period. So that's just a separate request as far as assessments and accountability for student progress.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. If there are no more questions, okay, thank you. We
you,
are going to
everyone.
move on to information discussion, item 12B, the photo story of Echo Canyon School. And I believe Dr. Hughes is here to,
We have Principal Kat Hughes
we can call you doctor.
and her guest, Lou Rodarty, to tell the Echo Canyon story.
A little faster.
Well,
Good evening, President Snowski, Vice President Hartwells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and Gladys. This is a complete 180 different kind of presentation than you just sat through. There's not a single graph, there's very little data, but there's a lot of pictures to kind of explain the story of Echo Canyon. What we are presenting to you tonight was a presentation that we were asked to give to the Scottsdale Association of Realtors Education Leadership Summit. So it was a group of about 30 realtors in the Scottsdale area that were learning about education. We were sandwiched between the Cave Creek Superintendent, the Paradise Valley Superintendent, and then Dr. Menzel. So I was the only principal that presented that day, and it was a much more organic presentation, so the fact that I'm standing behind a podium is a little different. So I'm going to try to formalize this a little bit more for you. I am excited to have Lou Rodarty with me this evening, otherwise known as Mr. Pickle. If you have been to our gardens, you have met that happy, shining face, and he will be here to answer some of your questions as well. So to introduce our school, we talked about how we were part of the Scottsdale Unified School District. We are a preschool through 8th grade school. We do service students age 3 through 8th grade, so that's really 3 through 13. Just imagine that developmentally. That's a good time. We are a school of choice. We are one of 3 schools of choice in Scottsdale. We do have approximately 350 students, and I know you are the governing board, so I'm going to answer that. We have 344 students effective today. Thank you for asking. And we are part of the Arcadia Complex. We often say we are the best kept secret in the Arcadia Complex because we are so small and we are tucked behind an off-white wall. Thank you for approving our new mural so that folks know that we're going to be there. A lot of folks don't even know that we exist. With that, we are located off the corner of 62nd and Camelback. As a school of choice, there are 2 things that make us unique. The first part that makes us unique is we are a looping school. Students who start with us at age 3 stay with the same teacher until they're 4 years old, and when they start with us in kindergarten, they keep that same teacher for 1st grade. They start with a new teacher in 2nd grade, stay with that teacher for 3rd grade, start with a new teacher in 4th grade, stay with that teacher for 5th grade. We have a somewhat of a, we'll call it an experiment going on with our 6th grade to address that middle school cliff that we just talked about. And our solution is we do something we call Middle School Light. Middle School Light involves 2 elective periods, so our 6th grade students get the same elective offerings that their colleagues at other schools get. However, they stay with the same homeroom teacher for math, social studies, language arts, and science. So they've got one teacher, so they build that relationship. So as they're making that transfer from standards-based education to a grade-based report card, they have the opportunity to build that relationship in 6th grade. But come 7th grade, they have the same 7th grade ELA teacher that they then have in 8th grade. One of the key factors to being a school of choice with looping, while John Hattie's research indicates that looping has a very, very positive effect on student academic achievement, it only matters if you have an amazing staff. So I do have an amazing staff. So the child who has Mr. Saul for 7th grade ELA will have Mr. Saul for 8th grade ELA. Ms. Hines for social studies in 7th grade, same thing in 8th grade. So we continue that looping model in our middle school. The kicker is when I started at ANLC, we had what we called curriculum looping, and the 7th and 8th graders, got, if regardless of their chronological age, they may have received 7th grade science, and then the next year they got 8th grade science, and then they got 7th grade science, and they got 8th grade science, which was really prohibitive to students moving in and out of our community, and as well as the content a student would get, because let's face it, it's not that sequential learning that we would want in standards. So that caused some of the problems back in the ANLC days. So that was part of the movement to Echo Canyon, and part of the reason we had the opportunity to address the Scottsdale Realtors, because that philosophy of ANLC is not where we're at today. And we're, like I said, the best kept secret in Arcadia. So the other key tenet of our school of choice is the academic, social, and emotional learning through the use of our gardens. And as you see here, you get a little glimpse of our garden in action with our students, but we're going to talk about the academics first. And under the academics, this really fits under commitment 1.2 as we're talking about project-based learning and problem-based learning and real-world opportunities. So we are incorporating those real-world science and engineering practices with those cross-cutting concepts and those core ideas about science using our natural phenomenon that that we find in our garden. We are using process-based notebooks to enhance our 4 domains of English language arts: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then the gardens are used across the curriculum for hands-on interdisciplinary instruction. Some samples, and I'm going to read this lovely poem to you. This is a 5th grade sample. Students had the opportunity to do pictures, go out and do photography as part of an art lesson, and then they had to tie it in with poetry. So that lovely one on the upper right, because I know I can't read it here, so I'm going to read it here. Cabbage, with your darker blue like pitch black sky, your rusty leaves in the wind. With bitter crunchy taste, you have a watery smell like fresh rain. Your moist leaves and your rough stems, your leaves are like a midnight sky. A galaxy is what you are, cabbage like a night sky. Okay, I don't know about you, but I wasn't writing poems like that in 5th grade. So little inspirational seeing what our kids can produce. Then we move, here's a 1st grade sample. On that bottom left picture that's a little hard to see is beans that were grown in a bag, and then in the 4 quadrants of that paper, it shows the life cycle of that bean sprout. The lovely young lady in the middle had grown sunflower seeds and then had transplanted them into the garden. So that is a very science-based lesson. With the same time, we're looking at sequencing and writing. Now we're looking at 6th grade. As we now talk about goal 4, partnerships, that would be Chef Charlene Badman of F&B, teaching our 6th graders how to break down a salmon called faro. And then you will see our 6th grade samples of writing there talking about how to break down a salmon. Before I became principal of Echo Canyon, I did not know how to break down salmon. I'm pretty good at it now. You'll also see that in that bottom corner underneath the bowl, that is a fig leaf. We did salmon wrapped in fig leaves after they learned how to break that down. Not a bad day to eat at Echo Canyon. 7th and 8th grade, talking about math. So here's a real world experience for these students. They had to calculate the height of the tree by looking at the canopy and looking at the width of the trunk. And then they had to apply that to how much organic fertilizer would our citrus trees need in our gardens, but they had to apply their math formulas that they had learned in class. So that classic, when are we going to use this? When we need to fertilize the trees. Our preschool program, we have a 5-star preschool program through First Things First. We are amazed to have both Miss and Mrs. Velarde teaching in our early childhood program, Team Early Learning. You'll see our preschoolers out there observing in the garden. That middle sunflower picture, that sunflower was 9 feet tall. And they had to estimate how tall that was. They had to estimate how many buds were on that sunflower stem. To answer the question, there were 27 sunflowers on that stem. You also see the wire butterflies important. They help pollinate our food. That is Alice Waters. When she visited us, she is what they call the godmother of the Edible School Project. So she had come out and helped and actually just toured our school and was amazed with what we offer at Echo. And then as we look at our kindergarten program, I can keep going on and on and on, but I'll make it snappy. What we have here are our kindergarten friends learning how to grow their own little strawberry patch. They harvested those strawberries, and then they wrote a compare and contrast essay on homegrown strawberries compared to store-bought strawberries. That middle picture is a smoothie, a red fruit and vegetable smoothie bar that they had to create. It was a good time. Chef in the Garden. Lou, do you want to talk about Chef in the Garden? You want me to? Go ahead. All right. So Chef in the Garden is one of our signature programs. If you've got questions, I'll invite that lovely man up here in just a minute. That is Swiss Chard. We are blessed to have Chef Charlene Badman, as well as a range of chefs that come out and help our students learn the whole value of eating nutritiously. We know as a Title I school that nutrition is a key element to students' well-being, and if students are well, then they are in a better headspace for learning. So one of the things we really do try to focus on is healthy nutrition. Here they are working on making Swiss Chard pancakes, otherwise known as farce. Breaking down a chicken, This is more Chef in the Garden, how to break down a chicken. You got lots of writing going on here, and we've got more partners. This is part of what we wanted to highlight for you, is looking at our partnerships that we have. That includes Chef Tamara Stanger, Chef Vincent from Vincent's, oh gosh, her name's escaping me. Help me, Lou. Bottom right. We did the redfish with her.
My memory is gone right now.
All right, either way, we sound like we're name dropping, we're not. The point is, we end up with a lot of chefs that come out to our school, and we're really thankful that they give of their time. We are incredibly thankful that post-pandemic, with what the restaurant industry has experienced, that they still continue to give of their time to us. Just some more pictures of what our kids are doing and making stuff in our garden. One of the key points that we like to highlight with our Chef in the Garden program, if you look on the left, that is an octopus in my hand. With Mr. Pickle, we were doing an octopus salad that day. We were doing lessons on sustainability, ocean sustainability for our students. So as we partner with ASU and we talk about sustainability, we also partner with some of our chefs to talk about those things. And yes, the kids willingly ate octopus salad. In addition to the academic learnings of our gardens, we also tie in our social and emotional. So as we look at social learning, and we recognize that a lot of folks don't necessarily know what social learning is. So we're going to define that for you in the context of our gardens. And we use our gardens to teach responsibility and to nurture something and its growth, making connections to other living things as well as increased environmental awareness. Aesthetic appreciation. Research shows that if you're in a beautiful place, you're in a better headspace. If you're in a better headspace, you're learning more. So we are teaching our students to appreciate where you are and to appreciate nature and appreciate the world around us. And at the same time, that respect for public and private property. A key part of that we frequently get asked on tours is, do students pick things to eat at their leisure? And the answer to that is no. And they don't do that because they know that other students are going to be using the gardens for academic reasons and gardening and chefing, cooking reasons. And so they respect when the food is ready that they're not harvesting it. However, it is incredibly, incredibly tempting to steal those peaches. They're delightful in the May. Come on out. Also, social learning, teamwork and cooperation while working with others. If you look at my friend on the left side of the screen there, he is doing what's called a mop of marinade with rosemary. You can bet your bottom dollar that that is a prized role in that particular cooking piece. So they all had to negotiate who was going to do what task and how to carry out a job and when to harvest and to problem solve. So you'll see that this allows our students the opportunity to work together in ways that they don't often get to work together. Also looking at the diversity in a garden, understanding that you can't have a garden that looks the same the whole way through. You have to have a variety of plants. You have to rotate your plants. You've got to do partnership planting. And appreciating that diversity in a garden is a metaphor for appreciating the diversity of our school and our community. And at the same time, understanding that we've got organic food and how that impacts the environment. And then emotional learning. What is that? And we use the garden as an opportunity to really control our emotions. Failure is a part of learning. If you've ever planted a garden, guaranteed you've killed something. You failed. And that's okay, because chances are you replanted something. And that's okay. So teaching our kids that you're going to fail and it's going to be all right. Persistence. Once again, get back in there and plant something else. Being present and mindful. Understanding that a garden takes time. That self-awareness and self-reflection, stress management, and emotional regulation. We frequently talk about when we were kids, were we taught any sort of coping mechanisms? I wasn't. But we do teach our kids, if you're frustrated, you can go out and work in the garden. Mr. Pickle's out there, why don't you go rake for a little bit? Mr. Pickle's out there, why don't you go weed for a little bit? Why don't you go out there, I can see you. When my assistant principal and I handle discipline, we frequently handle it out in the garden, sitting on one of the benches. It increases the ability to appreciate the aesthetic, and at that same time, that stress management tool that we want our kiddos to have. In case you didn't know, in the front of our school is a National Wildlife Federation certified habitat for Sonoran desert tortoises. We have them as you can see, as our students are sitting there on that little snake bench and our little friend Hebert is walking around there, that is an example of our partnership with ASU and their School of Sustainability and their Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College. We did a pilot project with them on nature journaling. We used that for academics, we used it for social, and we used it for emotional learning, where 3 different classes journaled for different purposes. And now this is a school-wide project. If you come out, you'll see him now. He's going to start hibernating soon. But we also had baby little tortoises. Yeah. Had to find those homes. The last piece that we're really, really proud of is our Monarch Way Station. It is a certified Monarch Way Station. And in this way station, it has all of the necessary food, water, and resources for our monarch butterflies as they are migrating through our area. Our youngest learners spend their time just observing the butterflies, while our older students take the time to partner with the Southwest Monarch Migration Society to tag those butterflies, and we track them on their website. So that gives us a little bit more of a grand scheme of things. And as you can see, there's just sheer joy when you have a monarch who has just hatched out of their chrysalis and their wings are too wet to even fly. And there you go. I talked fast, sorry, but I promised I'd keep it at 15 minutes, and it was about a 25-minute presentation before. So do you have any questions for us?
Yes, Board Member Beckman. I'm sorry, Greenberg.
Well, that's not fair. Now you're taking it from her.
No, I saw your hand up first. I was looking at Patty.
Kat, this is such a unique and wonderful school and education opportunity for families, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the time that I've spent on campus. Unfortunately, almost all of it pre-pandemic, so I've not had the opportunity to come out in the past year. But the partnerships we have with ASU, with various chefs, the chef night is truly incredible. And I hope that clearly from your passion and the information you provided, I hope that the Scottsdale Realtors Association takes that with them as they go out working with clients, meeting people, that face-to-face interaction, because admittedly, I was one of those individuals prior to considering running for the school board who had no knowledge other than ANLC. I had friends who went there, but its actual location was a mystery to me. Passing by it every day on that blank wall has been fantastic. My main concern really is that, if Echo Canyon, wins like a James Beard Award or something, if we'll be charged admission to get in there or have to get a wait list or something. I mean, it really is fantastic. So to you, I say, thank you again for really being out there and willing to meet with the public and advertise the school. As always, this is just really a special part of the Arcadia learning community and Scottsdale Unified School District.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg.
Well, I can't say much more than that, but I wanted to thank you for your presentation, because I too have been out to your campus and was privileged to be part of the Chef in the Garden one day and really thoroughly enjoyed my time there. And have to admit, I did walk away thinking, even though my kids enjoyed their time at Kiva, had I known about Echo Canyon, we may have made a different decision for one of them or so, because it's that cool of a concept and a wonderful school. So thank you for highlighting it tonight. Hopefully some people will be intrigued and come and tour, because I know that once that happens, they're just going to be sold. So thanks.
Well, thank you.
Vice President Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you, President Snowski. Thank you, Principal Hughes and Mr. Rodarte, for being here. And I'm a huge fan of the gardens and incorporating into the curriculum that natural component and scientific component, curiosity, and the Blue Watermelon Project. So much so, I also donate my time to that project. And there are a number of schools across the valley that participate, but it did start at Echo Canyon with Mr. Pickle. And actually, we now have a few other schools in SUSD who are also benefiting from that novel, that innovative thinking that Echo Canyon started with Chef in the Garden. So I just want to thank you for being here. This story is compelling, and I'm glad you're telling it. How was the presentation received? Can you tell us?
I got 3 thank you cards that were incredibly lovely, 2 of which said they're going to bring their kids when they're of school age. So I don't know, did you get more feedback?
So my favorite, so I'll tell you that typically they're not shy in Q&A, but there were more questions for for CAT than the superintendents. And in particular, how much does it cost to go there? How long is the wait list? And then a number of other things in terms of the instructional program. But it was really compelling, and they were all in on your presentation. So from my perspective, it was not only masterfully delivered, but it was well received.
Wonderful. Well, it is a lovely campus and a lovely community to be a part of. Thanks again for being here. It's great.
My only concern is that this has been the best kept secret in Scottsdale schools.
That's why I'm here.
So that's a concern of mine. It's been brought up in the past. Possible signage right off Camelback Road.
It's happening.
Directing arrows, flashing lights, whatever, that there's greatness down the street. Because I do think people don't understand that it's part of our Scottsdale Unified School District. They think it's some private school there. And it would be great if more students had such opportunities in learning. And thank you very much to Mr. Rodarty for supporting this program because, well, and the school in general. Our district public schools, one of the beauty is that we encourage and engage with community members to support student learning. So thank you for doing that. Oh, Board Member Beckman.
Can we find ways to highlight her presentation from a marketing aspect? I mean, it's too fantastic to just have it presented and then just go sit and.
One of my projects for fall break is to actually create this as a screencastify and link it on our
Nice.
our webpage. So I don't
Okay.
know, maybe a little bit more professional support on it, but I was going to do a voiceover screencastify.
Okay, but even from
Because I
a
had shared
district
it with our site
perspective,
council, and that was their suggestion, so.
I would love to see it out there. I mean, I just really would, because they really aren't as informed about the wonderful excellence you provide on that campus as they should be. So, let's,
Do that.
thank you.
All right, no more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the action items on our agenda for this evening, starting with 13A, approval of fiscal year 2021-22 annual financial report. Shannon Crozier.
Well, I kind of feel bad that was a really exciting and fun presentation, and now it's
We're just
followed
like
up with
ebbing and flowing
numbers.
tonight, right?
So, Board President Sanowski, Dr. Hartwells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests, tonight we get to do the annual financial report and look at financially how we ended last school year. So the annual financial report and school level reporting is basically a detailed report of our revenues and expenditures for the last school year. It provides the state and taxpayers with detailed information on how we spent our funds. It is required by the state to be done, and it's required to be approved by the governing board and submitted to the Department of Education by October 15th, which is why we are here tonight with it. So just looking at last year budget-wise for M&O, our average daily membership was $20,438. We had a base support level of $4,445 per student. So that gave us our M&O budget of $176 million. Our capital budget was $25.4 million, and federal projects was $43.3. A chunk of the federal products obviously being ESSER funds that have been coming through. This is actually a clip from the summary of the AFR. The AFR is several pages of a lot of data. This looks at just the summary, breaking it down by fund of the beginning fund balance, revenues, transfers, budgeted expenditures, budget, actual expenditures, and our ending balance. Some of our funds are budget-based. Some of our funds are cash-based. So an example being M&O is a fund-based or budget-based fund. So we start with cash being the second column and revenues, but how we spend or what we can spend in M&O is totally driven by a state set budget. So it doesn't matter how much cash I have on hand. I can only spend what our actual budget is. So our budget for last year, again, was $176.8 million. We spent $161 million, leaving about $15.7 in that account to carry forward. I know that cash balance in M&O is a little bit high looking. There's a couple reasons for that. There's a couple things that we're doing to address that. We set our budget in June, and that's when the tax rate are set. Well, we're funded on current year ADM. So the tax rate is set over the summer or in August, but we've done our budget based on what we think might happen and with ADM. And if that doesn't happen, if our ADM is lower than what we project, we end up taxing and receiving a little bit extra money there. One of the ways that we've addressed that with this year is the state, we didn't know what the budget was going to be. The state set that budget, and we didn't know what they were going to do, but we knew we were probably under what they were going to do, which means when we approved the budget in July and set our tax rate, it was based on about $4 million less than what it really should be. Could be a little bit more depending on our ADM is up higher than what we originally thought, so that'll help us out. But right there, we know that what we adopted and what our tax rate was set on was less than what our budget was going to be, so that will reduce that cash balance down throughout the year. So that just looks at the various funds that we have. Like I said, M&O, Classroom Site Fund. Classroom Site Fund is a cash account. So even though you see budget there, the cash that we have is what we can spend. So there's differences when we're looking at that, and we'll talk about this in another slide to show how that works. But looking at this, it tells you what our cash is, but it also tells what the expenditures and our budget was. And this is just, there's a lot of counts. I did receive a question as to how come we have things there that there's nothing in. This is a state form. We don't get all of the different funding sources that are out there. We get a lot of them. And so there are some that are blank because we don't have funds in those areas. So as I talked about on those slides before, our budgeted expenditures were $176.8 million. We spent $161 million, leaving a carry forward this year of 15.7. It's a little bit less than what we've done in the prior years. We are trying to get that cash balance. That's too high of a cash balance, too high of a budget carry forward balance within M&O. So we're trying to move that dollar amount down. We made a little bit of progress this year with that. So that's a little bit more than what we thought originally, but less than it has been. Again, what we can spend in M&O is totally dependent on what is our budget. Whatever cash we have on hand doesn't make a difference. And when we talk about the AEL, that's where that really comes into play, is cash in the bank. Just because we have more does not mean we can spend more. We can only spend what we are budgeted by the state. When we look at a cash accounts, we use the example of community education or community schools. Beginning cash balance being $4 million, revenue was $5 million. It's a little less than what we were pre-pandemic, but it's better than it has been. Actual expenditures being 5.5, so their carry forward is 3.6 million. The classroom spending. So every year, the AG's office does a report for every single school district that looks at how are they spending their money within different budget areas, and how do they compare to peers and to the state. We do an estimate. That information isn't going to come out from the AG's office until March. We generally do an estimate when we do the AFR, so we have an idea of how we ended the year. This, again, is an estimate. We're usually pretty close, but this is an estimate of what we think that report is going to look like when it comes out in March. The good part is 70% of our actual expenditures went to either classroom or classroom supports. Classroom supports being library, professional development, nurses, social workers, guidance counselors, all those additional things that may not be direct in the classroom but do still support the classroom. The good part is social student support went up. The bad part is some of our other areas went down, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So some changes that happened in the classroom spending. When I looked at what happened with the direct classroom instruction, what happened there that would change like it did, and a couple things popped out when we started looking through that data, going, okay, what happened with last year? We had vacant positions that were directly reported, that are coded directly to the classroom. So vacant positions being teachers, vacant positions also being paraeducators who are coded to the classroom, helping out directly in that room. So we had vacant positions, and we had a reduction in the number of FTE or positions in those areas. Unemployment, this is an odd thing that happened during the pandemic. The state, because so many people were out of work, the state just took whatever and started billing for anything, any claim they got for unemployment, which meant that our bill for unemployment insurance grew exponentially. And the data that was coming in and what we were being billed for, we knew was wrong. We were looking, I was one of the people listed on there. Well, I'm not unemployed. I didn't put anything in. There was fraudulent stuff that was literally happening. And so we went to the state and said, this isn't right. You're charging us for stuff that's not right. And the state basically said, you have to pay this and then dispute it. So we paid it during the COVID years, and then last year, and then disputed it. And last year, we basically didn't pay anything for unemployment insurance because we have so many credits now based off of the disputes that we did. So what happened is in 21, it inflated what we had to pay for unemployment insurance, and then this year, we're not paying anything. So that was about a $350,000 savings because one, we paid too much the year before and then didn't pay anything this year. I put in here no textbook adoption. Kim Dodds actually helped correct me with that a little bit. We had very few textbook adoptions. So generally we spend about $1.4 million in textbook adoptions for various areas. We did do very small ones for AP Macro, AP Gov, and IB Economics. But the total of all of that was $400,000 versus $1.4 million. So right there was a reduction of over $1 million from the classroom because we just didn't do one of the major textbook adoptions. But the biggest thing that impacted it is that during COVID, because there was no state assessment tests and there were no letter grades, we were able to pay the performance pay to our teachers in June. So right after school got out, we made that payment. So the money was received in, say, fiscal year 21. We paid it out in fiscal year 21. For last year, those assessments are back, which meant that changed how we have to pay our performance payout. So the performance pay, the money that we received and where teachers were for FY 22, isn't being paid out until FY 23, this current year. So the first payment of 2/3 was paid out in August, and the second payment will hopefully come soon. We're just waiting for data to be able to put that together. And so because of that, that was over $4 million that had been paid. We were paying the whole chunk of the performance pay in that school year. So because last year we had to switch over back to the old method, that meant last year we literally had no performance pay where we had performance pay in the past in that school year. That's a $4 million difference. And so when we look at why did our dollars in the classroom go down? Because we pulled $4 million out with performance pay. We didn't do $1 million plus in textbook adoption, $350,000 reduction because of unemployment, and then again, a significant dollar amount when you have vacant positions that we just can't fill, and we reduce some of that FTE a little bit. So that's what impacted, and it kind of helped me to see that there's a lot of little things that can happen that can really make a huge difference on what that dollars report looks like. With student support, we did go up. That's because we received a number of additional social workers through a state-funded grant. And when we look at these numbers, it encompasses way more than just M&O. It's looking at virtually there's a few accounts that are excluded, but it looks at almost every single account that the district has. Plant services decreased a little bit, which is great. We really wanted to see a decrease in plant services. I have no explanation as to why water and telephone expenditures went down. I know we've done some telephone audits and trying to get our cell phone bills down. But oddly, some things just cost less for plant services last year. That made it so the plant service amount appears to have gone down. Administration did go up very slightly, but it did go up a little bit. The reasons behind that are we had 3 assistant soups leave the district, and the vacation payout for that for vacation accumulated but not used, as well as we had some principals that had been here for a number of years that also left and went to other areas. And so that was a large increase in what we normally see out of that area. As well as we did the David and Beluso advertising campaign for the 125 years, and that was over 120,000. So those two things kind of moved our administration up a little bit. Food services increased. I don't think anybody is surprised that the cost of food costs more. I think we've all seen that ourselves at the grocery store. But for our food service department, that was $1.6 million. And to put that into perspective, that's a 26% increase. So huge impact there. Now, they did really well because we've had a lot of kids we were feeding and because that was free meals for all students. But we saw a significant increase in food prices. And then transportation also went up a little bit. The fuel was part of the increase within that area, as well as charter buses. We are short bus drivers. We are really short bus drivers. And because of that, things that we would normally have our own people do, we have to charter out. So when it comes to athletics, we're chartering out buses to get students to the games. And then the people who are here are working a significant amount of overtime. In fact, I was told just earlier this week that we have drivers that are maxing out on the number of hours they can drive in a week because they're picking up so many extra routes. So that adds to overtime pay, which helped to increase that area. This just looks at M&O by expenditure. So within our M&O only budget, salaries are 66%, benefits another 20%. So you can see really, we start talking about 86% of our budget is salary and benefits for our employees. And then this one looks at just M&O, and within that 66% of salaries, 68% of that is certified or teachers, 19% of that is classified, and 13% is administrative, being district administrative, but also principals are included, and their office staff are included in that administrative portion of it. Looking at the school level report, we did this a little bit differently this year, how we're going to show this. This is okay. This is kind of a beast of a report, and there's not a great way. I'm going to ask, is Michelle here? I have MFA. Am I going to have to? Okay.
Finance and senior administration have MFA.
Sorry, that was an unexpected. So yes, as a district employee that has a lot of access, I have to use my phone to be able to log in. Sorry about that. So for the school level reporting, there's a lot of data in here, but there's two tabs that really tell the information. And there's one tab that I think is the better one to look at. There's one tab that is just single school. So you can pick a single school to look at, or you can do a multi-school viewing. So within here, we picked Tavon. So if we had, in this box here, we limited it to viewing only, but in this box here, there's a drop down where you can pick any school that you would like to see. And it just looks at the information for Tavon between salaries, benefits, services, supplies. And this is all funds, not just M&O. And it breaks it down between instruction, student support, what we just looked at on the dollars in the classroom report. And so, like I said, there's quite a bit. It breaks down the classroom site funds for that particular school. So there's quite a bit of information that this shows. When we do the school comparison report, you can look at multiple schools. So we picked, again, Tavon and Kiva to look at, again, by choosing, there's a drop down here that you can choose to look at different schools. And with that, you can kind of compare multiple schools and say, okay, Tavon has a few more students than Kiva did last year, so it has the unweighted student attending count. And it looks at how much did we pay within those areas, and then how much is that per pupil. So you can kind of see there's a little difference between the schools, but you can compare what are those areas per pupil for each school. And again, it breaks it down by classroom, programs, special ed, the transportation, salaries, benefits, supplies. And it just kind of looks at what are those between the various schools. There are some things that you'll see when you're looking at this. If you look at a Title I school, they're generally going to have a higher amount because there's a lot more funds infused into that school. Kiva, interestingly, I'm going to scroll down. Kiva had a rebuild. So if we, right here, you'll see, you start looking into facilities. Whereas Tavon's was $1,600 per student, theirs was $38,000 per student. When you see something like that, we built Kiva. And so there's a huge $18 million expenditure for that school. So it does give you some kind of interesting information to look at to see how we compare school by school when we're looking at expenses. Within salaries, depending on the experience of the staff at that school, you can get some variances as well. But it gives a great perspective on how much we're spending per student at each school and to be able to compare like-size schools to see how we're doing. So this information, the AFR and this actual report will be posted probably Thursday, but before the end of this week on the Arizona Department of Education's website. We will have a link posted on the district website. And then once that's there, anybody can go in. And like I said, I have this on view only because we didn't want anybody to be able to change data in here. But when it is posted to ADE and we have that on our website, then anybody can go in on that link and they can start playing with different schools, looking at what their school information is and comparing like schools to see how they compare with other schools within the district. So with that, I will take any questions.
Questions? Board Member Beckman.
I just have a couple quick ones. Shannon, with regard to your budgeted expenditures and your actual expenditures, I understand that there's some that are very straightforward and historical, but like, for instance, can you speak to the self-insurance trust? Are we going to have, you started with a budgeted expenditure of $45 million and we ended with actual of $23.7?
So we are trying to get, the self-insurance trust is one that we have played around with where things weren't always loaded in the past, and we're trying to get that more with the actual what is in the bank loaded correctly budget and what those expenditures are. Additionally, we're purposefully trying to get the
Cash balance.
the budget, or I'm sorry, the expenses down. I'm sorry, the cash down in those self-insurance funds. So yeah, we are working on how do we address making sure that what is budgeted, part of what is budgeted is what's in our accounts too. Sometimes we budget things high because that's what we really have. If we budgeted it lower and then spent more, that would be a problem for us on the AFR. So there are times where we purposely will have that budgeted higher, but some of that also has to do with what is the balance in that account.
Okay. And then the only other one I had a question about was the classroom site funds differential. And what you budgeted versus the actual.
So, yeah, and that comes down to that performance pay. So when we do the budget for the classroom site fund, we include, so it's made up of what our carry forward has been in that account, as well as the budget that we'll receive that year for that account based off of the student count that we have and the dollar amount that we know we're going to receive. So the budget is what we know we're going to receive, and I have to budget that way with the state. Again, because performance pay was paid in August, and performance pay for this year is quite a bit more than what it has been in the past. Had we actually done the performance pay in fiscal year 22, that cash, that ending carry forward and our expenditures would have been several $1 million higher than what it is here. It really comes down to the money and is budgeted in the year we receive it, which is like, in this case, FY22, but we don't pay that performance pay out until later. We do want to talk with our auditors and our teaching staff about some opportunities to maybe change how we're doing performance pay and some of the money within the classroom, because we do have some higher balances in that performance or in that classroom site fund. And the great part about it is we were limited to 3 buckets of money that were very specific, and it's all one. now. So that opens up some possibilities on what we can do. We're just trying to figure out how we do it without getting a supplanting issue.
Is that former 301 bucket that you and I have talked about many times?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So because of that, though, there is some extra monies in there that we know we need to figure out how to get that to our staff. That may end up being some kind of performance pay thing that is done throughout the whole year, and then an amount at the end of the year. But some of that has to do with what our performance pay agreed standards are going to be on how we're going to pay that money out. But we are talking about how can we make some adjustments there and still be in compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Vice President Dr. Hurtwells.
Thank you, President Sinowski. Thank you, Shannon. I don't know what slide number it is, but the one titled M&O salaries by classification. Yeah. Do you know what are the number of FTEs in each one of those?
I would have to look that up.
Could we get that, please? Thank you. Thank you. That was it.
Board Member Greenberg.
Every year with the AFRs, we end up discussing what's in the AFR, but out of curiosity and just as clarification, are there any amounts that the district receives, budgets and or actually spends that are not covered by an AFR?
No, everything that we spend must be in the AFR.
Okay, I think that's a really important point of clarification. The AFR is one of my favorite reports every year because I think it helps for many people tie the connection between what a budget is and what actual expenditures are, which is often missing because when people see the budget, they think, oh, all this is being used for this and whatnot, but actually looking at the breakdown is very helpful. And there is, as always, misunderstandings related to the budget and what funding sources are. And so, I've heard numbers that we receive $500 million a year or $400 million, and we're spending that out. And that is not accurate. And these are all available on the the education site, are they not? They're on the finance page.
They are all on our district finance. So if you go into the Scottsdale Unified School District website and do departments finance, you will see a list of all of our budgets. You will see a list of all of our AFRs. You will see a list of all of the AG reports or the dollars in the classroom reports for Scottsdale. So there are a number of things that, yes, they're on the AD's website or ADE's website, but they are on our website to get to that link. So you can easily get to any of these from our district website under finance.
Yeah, the AD site is a little difficult maybe for members of the public to use, so it's great. As always, we are required to post certain of these documents on our page, but for those interested, you can look at all these documents online on our website finance page, and they are interesting reads, so you can kind of see where money's being allocated. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing that there are none, I will ask for a motion of approval of fiscal year 2021-2022 annual financial report.
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Shannon. And it looks like you're staying up here.
I think I'm here the rest of the
for
night.
this next one. Okay, please entertain for us the information for the approval of award request for proposal number 23008, contracted special education services.
So just as it says in the board agenda, we have a number of vendors that we use for contracted services for special education. Unfortunately, when I talk about having vacant positions, that means a lot of times those vacant positions are still very much needed. So we have to go to contracted services to try to fill them. Doesn't fill all of them, but it fills, we do what we can with those outside services. So this is just an RFP that we did for those special services. We estimated it to be about $1.5 million for this school year, annually approved, or can be approved annually for the next 4 years. And there's a group of vendors that we are recommending. There's not one vendor who can provide all these services. We utilize multiple vendors and still struggle to get positions or to get vacancies filled.
Questions, Board Member Dr. Hurtwells?
Thank you, President Sinowski. Thank you, Shannon. Are these the same vendors we have used in the last fiscal year?
Yes. I don't know that there are any new ones, but I do know that the ones that we are currently using are on here.
So has there been any kind of follow-up to make sure that the vendor services that have been provided over the last however many months have been sufficient?
So as a part of the RFP process, we utilize the people to review those RFPs that are directly in those areas. So we had somebody from special education, we had more than one person, I believe, from special education on that team who would have reviewed the RFP. Within that scope, there's always a question that talks about prior service or a weight that you can do for experience with them. And so as a part of that, the team who evaluates that, and again, having team members from the special education department on it, would have that information as to, if there was a concern with somebody not doing something, I don't think they would have approved them. Adding them on, we've struggled. They can't fill positions either. The companies are just like us. So the biggest thing I think we run into is, just like us, they're also struggling to fill the positions to offer to us. But there are people from the special education department who are on that RFP to review it, and they would have that knowledge.
So there is some feedback mechanism to the schools who are using these service providers to understand if the quality assurance is there? I see.
Yes.
Dr. Williams
is
can
here.
answer that question.
Good evening. So as far as the contract agencies go, so when we went through this RFP, there was a lot of information that we read through. There are a few of these companies that are new to us, a few that had teachers or people that were available for us that weren't available through other agencies. We also regularly review with principals, building admin, and teachers if it's a paraeducator, or the building admin if it's a teacher, to see how that person's doing, and we provide feedback to those contract agencies. So if we have a teacher or a paraeducator who's not providing the services that we would expect them to provide, we would provide that feedback to the agency. We can remove that person from the position and put somebody else in it, if we have someone available.
Okay, so I understand there's a rolling expectation analysis that's kind of built into the process.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Board Member Greenberg?
For these individuals, and I guess it's more of a broad question for any vendors we use who supply personnel onto our campus, I assume that it is the vendor's responsibility to conduct, background checks, fingerprinting, all of that work is done by the vendor, and that's something they certify to us?
Yes. So that's all provided by the agency. We interview the individual, so it would be people from special education as well as building admin that interview those people, vet them as well, but they come to us pre-vetted. So they come to us with resumes, all of that information beforehand. So for example, I got one yesterday that sent me the resume. Within the resume, I realized that the teacher was not certified. They only had a sub-cert, so I did not interview that person. So all of that information comes to us beforehand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Board Member Beckman?
Okay, just so the public and I myself can be aware, because there's nothing beyond this recommendation here on the main page, is this for paras? Is it for therapists? Is it for, what's it for?
All of those things. So we hire paraeducators, special education teachers, therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, basically every position within special education. I would say, I don't think we have any contracted PTs and OTs right now. We do have contracted speech language pathologists, teachers, paras, and psychologists.
Okay, and how are we coming up with the rates on this? I mean, as compared to who we have on staff already? I mean, have you guys put a proposal or a budget together with regard to that?
So that's the really tough part, because we budget on filling the position and what the position is. And a lot of the times these contracted services end up costing more than what the position is. What we've been doing is putting the contract services through our Medicaid account, or MIPS, and then moving expenses back into M&O as the year progresses. I will tell you the amount of money that it is costing for this is significantly more than what it is for the salary itself. So basically, we're paying it out of one account and then moving as much as we can out of that account back to M&O. We have M&O carry forward, so we moved most of that back into M&O, but we've had times where we've had to utilize that MIPS count a little bit more to cover some of that contracted services. because it is a lot, it's expensive.
Okay, I just was curious, because I know the state, the Department, DDD, like, puts out a rate book, like, with regard to some of these services, and do we ever, like, take a look at that for, like, kind of a competitive analysis of what we're paying?
Yeah, through the RFP, they're looking at what are the
Okay.
rates that they're charging, and
We look at the contract agencies, and the hope is that they would have similar rates amongst each other, right? So within the RFP, we would look at those rates. If somebody was well outside of the range of the other agencies, we would try to look somewhere else. We also do, within, just for everyone's information, we do look at those contract agencies. Once the teacher spends a certain, or the para spends a certain amount of time with said contract agency employed by SUSD, we do have the ability to hire them as an SUSD employee. But that doesn't always happen.
Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate the questions that have been asked here. My original question, has there been a cost analysis of hiring these contract services versus offering the compensation and benefits to our employees to begin with to attract and retain them?
that is a great question, and it's actually something that Dr. Wilson has brought up as well, is we need to look at, perhaps the solution isn't continuing to throw at contracted services, but maybe we need to significantly increase the stipend or bonus we do to our special education employees to get them to come to us directly instead of having to contract that out. Once you go down that road, you're down that road, and so there's some looking that we have to make sure that there aren't unintended consequences that pop up
Sure.
if we were to do something like that. But it is something that we're really looking at, because the cost of contracted services is a lot.
Are the contracted service employees also required to go through the professional development as our other staff members?
For the most part, yes. So if they're here on a half day, they would go to those professional developments that are available on a half day. We do pay contract employees a certain number of hours per week, as opposed to teachers who are on a contract that don't necessarily have hours built into them. But typically, yes, they are part of those professional
Okay,
developments.
thank you. Dr. Menzel, did you want to weigh in on this?
I just wanted to build on some of the responses. First, our priority is always to hire our own people when we can. So the shortages that we've experienced across the education sector are more acute in the special education arena. So fewer people who meet the criteria and fewer available. So we've talked about under Strategic Planning Goal 3, how do we attract and retain talent, providing competitive compensation. So that is part of the work that we're doing, but this is an experience of districts all across the valley, the state, and the country, just because there aren't enough people who choose to become special educators. And at the end of the day, we've got to meet the compliance requirements, and that sometimes means spending a little bit more to get someone from a contracted service in order to be able to do so, but it's always our first choice to have someone become part of our team.
Thank you. Board Member Greenberg.
Yeah, I think one of the tricky parts about this is that if you are using a third-party vendor to supply staff, it is more expensive from what we are budgeting that position at. But the real question is that cheaper than what the fair market pay would be for a permanent employee in that position? So I think that's oftentimes one of the tricky things, is it's not simply matching what the temp
Sure.
or what the vendor agency provides, but actually saying, oh, for this position, we are way, if we're below what the actual cost, because, of course, they're adding 10, 15%, whatever margin on top of what, for their own profits, but we have to account for the fact that that is still potentially and usually, from an economic perspective, cheaper than what the full-time employee is. So it could be that, and obviously we know that we're restricted by a budget and pay is very low here, abysmally so, but it could be that we are so significantly below that if we start down that path, the unintended consequences could be very debilitating in the long term. So it's a really tough, I don't envy you, but I appreciate that you guys are looking into it and trying to figure out some solutions.
Seeing that there are no more questions, I would ask for a motion to approve 13B, the award of request for proposal number 23008, contracted special education services.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to C, authorization of expenditure, Kiva Elementary School Professional Design Services, addendum to scope of services agreement with Orcutt Winslow. Shannon.
So I'm going to try to do this. Dennis was not able to be here tonight, and he probably could explain this way better than I can. But with the Kiva rebuild, what they want, it was done over, the design was done over COVID, in which they had to do the design work online, which they did a great job. However, there was a hindrance, a little bit of that. But in that process, they needed to do a reduction of square footage, which meant that the design team had to go back and redo the design and make some significant changes there. As a result of that, there was significant amount of time for doing that. And so as a part of that design work, the scope has been modified to increase for that basic redesign within the Kiva design project. So this is just authorizing the payment from bond for that change in scope due to redesign or modifications to the design.
Vice President Dr. Hartwells has a question.
I do. I have a clarifying question. I'm hoping you can clarify, Shannon.
Okay, I'll do my best.
So in the background, the first paragraph, the third sentence says they absorbed the 609.5 redesign hours needed to meet the needs of the district. But then down at the bottom, the third paragraph, last sentence, it's using the blended rate of $150 an hour. I'm sorry, the previous sentence, the schematic redesign beginning November 2020 was for a total of 609.5 hours. And then goes on to say what the rate would be for that 609.5 hours. So what is this money for?
So it would have been more. However, they have absorbed some of that and changed the percentage, is the way I understand it.
Of almost $100,000. Is that correct? And looking at the original fee and the revised fee?
No, well, had that not taken, or had they not absorbed that, it would have been 91,000 instead it was 89. So it's a small change.
Isn't?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it
yeah.
equates to, 91,000. They applied 91,000 of that to the bottom line of the project. They're asking for 89,000.
Yeah, so if I look at the addendum, the way I understood the addendum was that the background information is just background information about the relationship we've had, but the actual addendum that we're being asked to approve relates to the fact that there was an increase in construction costs, and 5.15% of the increased construction costs leads to the $89,000 that we have to approve. Is that, Jennifer, is that correct?
That's the way I'm reading it as well.
Board Member Beckman?
So the construction cost increased from 19 million to 21.6. So if you originally had that 19 million at 5.4, we would have had a fee. And then, but because it went up, did we hit some sort of break point or something? And so it dropped to 5.1 based on times the new 21 million. And that's why we have that differential.
Do you have,
Does that make sense?
Again, without Dennis here, we can't say for certain, but my recollection is that that was part of a conversation as we were looking at overall costs. They reduced the fee percentage, Orcutt Winslow did, as part of an overall strategy. So we did the initial design development. You had a building that was larger than we could support with the budget. We had to go back and make some changes. And then you have all of these other variables this was all right as COVID was starting and the whole world was changing. And I don't know that there was anything in the contract that required them to reduce their fee.
Not that I recollect, so.
Or was it that Yeah, without the background, but I think that just the gist of the thing is that at 5.15%, the original fee was 1 million, but because of increased construction costs, is now 1.115 million.
So is this time sensitive?
I mean,
So I would say this, they could probably wait 2 weeks until our October 18th meeting if the board tabled it, and we can bring it back at that time.
I would
I would
move to table
appreciate
it.
that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we're kind of leading ourselves and getting a lot of input, which is great, but I would like some kind of concrete.
And I second that.
So there's a motion to table this, and there's a second. All in favor of tabling this item, say aye.
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 Motion to table passes 5-0. So we will move on to 13D, authorization of expenditure to Vaughn Elementary School Professional Design Services Addendum to Scope of Services Agreement with SPS Plus Architects. Shannon?
this is very similar to the last one, so I'm wondering if you would like to table that item as well.
And we don't want to speculate on an
Yeah.
answer without Dennis here,
Well, do we
unless
have-
Jennifer
do we-
knows the answer.
Do we have any questions on this?
I understood it. I mean, within the context of this project, I
Right.
understood it
Right.
the same way I just read the addendum, and that was provided by Dennis.
And this is an added addition to the
Right.
scope of services, and so it's, I mean, it's a bit more straightforward.
Yes.
I read this as additional service.
It is additional service,
That's
yes.
different than the
Yeah.
previous one. I get this.
Yep.
I get the
Okay.
other ones.
Are there any additional questions for Shannon on what is proposed here? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve through authorization of expenditure for Tavana Elementary School Professional Design Services Addendum to Scope of Services Agreement with SPS Plus Architects LLP?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor to approve this item, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, moving on to approval of the storm drain facilities agreement, Kiva Elementary School in the town of Paradise Valley. It looks like Shannon and Jennifer will be helping us with this.
Yes, so with the Kiva project, this is an agreement between us and the town of Paradise Valley for storm drainage facilities. Basically, with this one, we need to keep our property free of debris and cleaned up so it doesn't clog up a storm drainage. And essentially, if we're doing that like we should be doing that, then there's really not a cost associated with it unless, again, we didn't keep up our property and it somehow clogged up the storm drainage and we needed to do something to clean that up.
Board members seeing the documents presented here, do any of you have any questions?
Madam President, this was reviewed by our real estate council partner, Tom Halter, so he has given his blessing to it as well.
Super. I'd like to make a motion to approve the storm drain facilities agreement between Kiva Elementary School and the town of Paradise Valley. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 5-0. And moving on to 13F, resolution regarding the aggregate expenditure limit. Jennifer.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Dr. Menzel, the district has been asked to assist in approving a resolution that would go to the state legislature that addresses the aggregate expenditure limit. One question received by one of the governing board members was whether this would be a concern with respect to use of public funds. I don't think that it would be, given that there's not a ballot measure pending on this. It's a request to ask our state legislature to increase the aggregate expenditure limit. I can have Ms. Crozier, if you'd like, explain a little bit more about what that means, but it is a significant amount of money to the district if that is not increased, and it is going to require legislative action to do so.
Board Member Greenberg has a question.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. I appreciate
Comment?
that we've checked that. I think in general, our district, the board has refrained from passing resolutions, and I've been mulling it over quite a bit. I think I'm okay with this resolution to the extent that this is about funding cuts directed to our students. And I know we passed a resolution related to, I believe, Tonalea, right, about building not Tonalea, can't think of the name of the school off the top. I'm drawing a blank, but in relation to the crosswalk.
That was Talia.
Oh, it was Tonley. Well, there we go. I guessed it right. So I think in both those, in that case, we found that we had to pass it to put it before them, and it was directly related to our schools and student safety. And I think in this case, it's similar. The only thing I'd say is if we're going to kind of go with resolutions, I see the board president is signing this one. I think that's fine, unless Julie completely opposes this resolution. But we may have times where a board president doesn't agree with a resolution for whatever reason, such as this one. And so on a go forward, it might be my recommendation to the board to consider just having it, if it passes, be Scottsdale Unified number 48 governing board, just to avoid someone being effectively forced to sign something they don't personally agree with.
That makes sense.
But for this one, unless you have opposition to it, I don't have an issue with it, but I'm just.
We'll see with my vote.
I want to avoid a slippery slope where the board just starts issuing resolutions all the time, and I think that wouldn't be advised by council either. So just trying to find what is the appropriate test for when the board should pass a resolution is something maybe we consider in the future.
Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Yes, thank you. I have a logistical question. Why wouldn't it be signed by all the board members? I'm sorry, Ms. McLennan, why would it?
Madam President, Dr. Hartwells, it absolutely can be signed by all the board members. Typically, when the board approves it, it's only the president who signs, but certain documents you all sign, such as Dr. Menzel's contract, for instance. So there's no problem to have you all sign it if you want to.
Okay, I was just curious if there was a reason to have just one signature.
Well, I
There's
think
not. Okay.
if you didn't have a unanimous vote, then, it would be different. So I think it gets to the point of, how do you reflect something like that as a resolution? If it's a 3-2 vote, it still passes. And so then how do you reflect that, given not everyone voted to support on a resolution?
I guess just my own kind of reaction to that, if we're going to do a board resolution like this, it would seem to have more teeth if the board unanimously signed and submitted. A resolution where it's split doesn't seem to have, in my view, the same kind of energy behind it, but that's just my own personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, apologies, please. Sorry.
Can I propose that we amend this and include our signatures, all board members?
Absolutely.
Okay. Board Member Greenberg?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because of open meeting law, it could be difficult it would be difficult if the board, if there was disagreement, to know ahead of time. So then you're voting on a resolution that gets a 3-2 or 4-1, or a 4-0, if someone's absent, a 4-0 or abstains. So it's just kind of a weird, I was just saying that it's something to think about, that if there are ever kind of more contentious issues, because there are people who not that I don't ascribe to this, but there are people who legitimately believe schools are overfunded, so they may not support this type of move by the legislature. So I'm just trying to think of ways that doesn't put anyone in a position they personally don't want to be in for that. That's all.
And to note, this isn't about determining the funding, it's about allowing the expenditure of the funds already
been
allocated by the state. Yes. Board Member Beckman.
So I'm going to ask this question in relation to this, so I stay on this agenda item, but maybe you can explain that, because when we take a board vote, in my recollection, we are representing the board in our individual capacity, but as a united board. So even if we didn't agree with the budget individually, if we passed it, we sign it.
Right.
And so I don't, either way, I mean, I think we all agree on this, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions or comments on this? Then I would like to make a motion to approve this resolution regarding the aggregate expenditure limit as amended, meaning all of our signatures will be included. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Appreciate that discussion. Well, that takes us to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn this governing board special meeting?
So moved.
Moved, is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. All in favor to adjourn this governing board meeting, say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0. This meeting is adjourned at 8:04 PM.